It's wonderful to be here. And unfortunately, the landscape of the weaponization of social media has increased in orders of magnitude since my co-authored 2016 article. The fact is that national militaries and intelligence agencies around the world now routinely use social media for the purposes of information manipulation to advance one political or military objective or another. There are huge for-profit industries also focused on the spread of disinformation. And because it is quite easy to make money in these efforts, this industry shows no sign of slowing down soon. So in modern conflict, the military center of gravity is quite often public opinion, not just in a particular country, but international public opinion. And the best and most immediate way to reach those international audiences is now through social media. So this is why when a terrorist organization or a military or an intelligence agency is thinking about advancing their objective, they turn to disinformation, to social media manipulation in order to advance their goals. There was an unprecedented volume of disinformation around the 2020 US election. It was so much, in fact, that it was the consensus of everyone involved in monitoring efforts that it was not possible to track or address everything. Instead, we had to pick and choose to think about what would be the most harmful disinformation, and then put measures in place so we could quickly identify and push back against those claims. In the case of the United States, the most harmful disinformation was that around election processes, the allegation of voting irregularities, the idea that our elections were illegitimate. We understood these things to be an existential threat to our democracy, and so those are the things that we prioritized. And I think as we enter this year of elections in 2024, one has to take that same mindset, to understand that you cannot address the full volume of false claims, but you have to think about what will be the most damaging and put your resources there. The disinformation campaign that sticks most clearly in my mind was the disinformation campaign to undermine the outcome of our 2020 election, because this led to an attack on our U.S. Capitol. I live in Washington, D.C., and I actually walked down while the riot on January 6th was still taking place, just so I could observe it firsthand. And what I came away with was just a shock at how so many people involved in that attack thought that they had done a good thing, thought that essentially they had saved American democracy by desecrating our Capitol and engaging in insurrection. What drove them to take that action was a disinformation campaign with many parts, but it was purposeful false information spread with the intention to deceive by political actors who did not care about the future of our country. Disinformation has two big harms. First, it leads a segment of people to believe something that is false, and sometimes even to act on it, sometimes even to lead to violence. But in most cases, not that many people necessarily believe a particular claim. But what disinformation also does is it makes it harder to find any sort of truth at all. It makes people drop out of political processes. It makes them more apathetic. It makes them more inclined to disengage with politics altogether. But that diminishment of trust, that frustration and feeling that there's no way to tell the truth, so what's the point anyway? These things are deeply harmful to democracies because, of course, if we don't have democratic participation, we don't have a democratic consensus. If we don't have trust in our government, we don't have a consensus about basic facts. And these things pose a deep and persistent harm to our countries. If I was to draw attention to one emerging trend in disinformation, it would have to be the rise of generative AI. And put simply, modern AI tools make it almost impossible to determine whether an image, a piece of text, or even a video is real or if it's machine generated. So now more than ever, it's important when you encounter something online to see who else is sharing it first, to see if it's being verified by other sources. Because if many people are citing different sources about the same event, chances are it's real. If there are no other people doing that, chances are it's fake. And indeed, there was a viral piece of AI-generated deepfake several months ago when I was working in the US Department of Defense, which showed our Pentagon on fire, an allegation that there had been an explosion. In that case, that was not a very effective piece of disinformation because there are 20,000 people who work in that building. There were journalists all around who could poke their head out a window and check to see there was no fire, and so say, this is fake. That's an example of corroboration, meaning that the disinformation wasn't very effective. That's the sort of thing you need to look for. Who else is echoing the claim? What other original sources do they have to support their position? Well, governments, technology companies, and civil society all have different parts to play in countering disinformation. Governments write laws which are sometimes enforceable against people who repeatedly spread disinformation. But there are also limits to law because one does not want to impede on freedom of speech. And so governments have some measures they can take, but they can't always do everything that one might like. For technology companies, they own the infrastructure, the social media platforms on which disinformation spreads. They also set the rules that determine how information spreads. And they can take particular measures, whether it's making it easier for fact checkers to contextualize a claim, whether it's slowing the spread of viral claims when there's no verification that they're true. This is broadly known as platform architecture, and this is the domain of technology companies. And then finally, civil society groups like my own, the Digital Forensic Research Lab of the Atlantic Council, our job is to figure out the ground truth, to look at often a vast ocean of competing claims and try to figure out what's true and what's not, and how to contextualize that information for the general public. And these different groups focused on different parts of the problem, they have to work together. They have to build mechanisms and relationships so they can quickly coordinate. And they have to do all that in a transparent fashion so the public, if they're interested, can keep up with what's going on. So how do you counter disinformation? A not very good way to do it is to tell someone who's seen disinformation and they're sharing it, that they're wrong. This sort of direct adversarial engagement doesn't really work. Instead, effective pushback against disinformation often comes from a place of empathy and understanding, appreciating why someone might be inclined to believe the content that they did, but then trying to provide them with additional facts and context so they understand that the disinformation is wrong. Not only that, but revealing that people who are spreading that disinformation in the first place, who are originating those claims, do not have the best interests of anyone at heart, that they're using this broader audience to advance their own objectives or for their own financial gain. And then finally, to promote horizontal thinking. That is, when people engage with any claim online, to see who else is echoing it. To instead of vertical thinking, where you dig deep into one source or website, to think more in basically a more shallow, more broad fashion, to consult as many sources as possible and to see who else is echoing that claim. Those are some common techniques to approach counter disinformation, but of course it is a very difficult and resource-intensive process.